Okay, great. Right, can now get started. Welcome again. I'm Dana, and I'm a volunteer at SASTA, Society for the Advancement of Science and Technology in the Arab World. We are the conference's main organizers. SASTA is a non-profit organization which aims at improving the quality of research in the Arab world, and we use different strategies for that. One of our strategies, of course, is the conference that we have organized, where we have invited scientists from diasporas all around the world, share with them their lessons, share with us, their lessons, challenges, and stories. For this session, IOM Diaspora Mapping Toolkit, a comprehensive methodology for diaspora studies and policy. It's my honor to introduce to you Dr. Larissa Lara, who's a Transitional Communities and Digital Communication Officer at IOM Geneva. And she has completed her PhD at the Center for Ethnic and Migration Studies at the University of Liège. I'm really sorry. I have difficulty pronouncing it, at the Research Unit of Migration and Society of the University of Paris. She also holds a master's in migration studies from the University of Oxford and an MA in conflict security and development from King's College London. She has also published in both policy and academic journals. Welcome, Dr. Larissa. We are very, very happy to have you with us today.
Thank you so much, Dana. It's such a pleasure to be here with you. And before even starting my presentation, I think we're a quite small group. So I'm really looking forward to meeting you in the second part of the session, because I think this is also a great opportunity for us to start exchanging and learn more from your experiences. And also, I wanted to thank SASTA for all of the great efforts that you have done putting together this brilliant conference. And it's really a true honor to see how diasporas can mobilize themselves and create these spaces for collecting experiences, exchanging and learning from each other. So without any more interventions from my side in those regards, I would like to start the conversation more on the Diaspora Mapping Toolkit. Just allow me 1 second to share my screen. I hope you can see it. Yes, and I will start with a very short video for you to start getting engaged into the conversation. Let me see if it works sometimes.
Interested in diaspora communities, what they do, and where they are? IOM's Diaspora Mapping Toolkit is your go-to guide for mapping your community, understanding the potential, and creating forward-thinking policy. The toolkit builds on IOM's rich experience of over 150 diaspora mappings implemented across diverse contexts, including pilot schemes in Ecuador, Eswatini, and Senegal. This free online toolkit has everything you need to understand better how to collect data within your diaspora community and learn more about its economic, human, social, and cultural potential. Using these tested tools and methodologies, you can collect better data that will enable you to create well-informed strategic policies. Start using IOM's Diaspora Mapping Toolkit today.
So thank you so much for those who have just joined the session. We are just starting, so welcome everyone. Today we're going to discuss the Diaspora Mapping Toolkit, and I would like to divide my session in 3 main areas. The first one, I will very briefly present what it is, why is it relevant, how is it different, and why we are so happy to be also here sharing it with you. In the second section, I will go more into the details. I will describe and analyze with you the elements of the Diaspora Mapping Toolkit. So maybe you have had already the chance to look at it, and you have already seen that it's quite a comprehensive document with more than 400 pages, but please be sure that you don't have to be scared of the amount of pages, because I will talk to you about the different elements, and hopefully we will learn together on how you can navigate this very comprehensive tool with tips, tricks, and very interesting data. And finally, I would really like to learn from you. Why do you think this Diaspora Mapping Toolkit can be used in your settings from your organizations? And we're very welcome to have your feedback on the toolkit. So just very briefly as introduction, I would like to to highlight, as the video was explaining, the short video, that this diaspora mapping toolkit is built from over a lot of experience that IOM has collecting data within diasporas globally. It presents a very comprehensible way of approaching diaspora studies, and it presents also quite a lot of methodologies on how to do it, from qualitative to quantitative to also a secondary data. So you will have everything to a certain extent there, just ready for you to use and to explore. And you will have the opportunity to do it in a very easy way, because all the diaspora mapping toolkit has specific tips, best practices, lists of, for instance, do's and don'ts, and it makes it very easy and fluid to use. It's really thought like in a way that the user can really make the decisions on their own, and very, very reflective in each of the stages of the research process. So the tool is designed to be rigorous. Well, the aim of the tool is actually to produce rigorous and comparable data. As you know, of course, diaspora is a very complex term, but with this toolkit, what we're trying to do is to try to have an homogeneous way of looking at diasporas and collect data. And why is this important? Because it is better to have, as you know, not only as researchers, but also as policymakers, to have the most accurate data and comparable data to be able to produce good policies and good analysis. So this is also one of the aims of this diaspora mapping toolkit. It is an adaptable and flexible tool, and it has been tested in the field in 3 different countries and in 2 different regions, in the African region and in the Latin American region. So the whole process has been very collaborative between our colleagues from University of Maastricht and colleagues at IOM in regional offices, country offices, and also at headquarters. So it has been really a pleasure to develop this tool and see that multi-stakeholder approaches are very important for this type of tools. So that was the first part of the session. Now I'm going to go into the elements and more, and I will describe more in detail what the diaspora mapping toolkit offers. And for that, I will present the first element, which is the step-by-step guide, which I have to be honest is one of my favorite parts of this toolkit, because it presents a very detailed and concrete way of taking decisions in diaspora mapping toolkit, in the diaspora mapping toolkit, and in the diaspora mapping process, in all the research process. So we go step by step, part by part, and decisions. As you know, as researchers, we are encountered to make many decisions, and of course we have to think about different things like our positionality, our reflexivity, our biases, potential biases, how to sample. All of this is addressed in the diaspora mapping toolkit, and we try to do it in a very simple and systematic way. So in order to do so, we address 8 key decisions that have to be made through the process of designing and implementing the diaspora mapping. The first part is the conceptualization of the research. So what are the objectives? That's the first question that we have to ask ourselves whenever we are conducting a diaspora mapping. What are the objectives? What is the scope? What is the aim? All of these questions have to be clear before we even start deploying or developing the methodology, before we basically implement and go to the field to collect the data. So we also address very key specific questions on the decision process behind defining the unit of analysis. There are different ways of doing this in diaspora mappings, but basically, are you going to interview individuals or organizations? So all of these questions are also addressed in the toolkit. Also the time, and resources. It's very important to consider time and resources available, because that will impact directly on the quality of your results, and then how you can keep producing those diaspora mappings through the years, which is also very important to have that longitudinal vision for your own population. Then we go to the second part, or the second theme that I would say it's very important when we're making this type of research, which are the methodologies and methods for diaspora mappings. For this, we address 3 main questions. The first one is what methodology is the most appropriate. We basically know that there are many different methodologies that we can use, from qualitative to quantitative and mixed method approaches. So in this diaspora mapping toolkit, you will see how you can use these different tools, and we present how to use them and implement them in your case. What is needed in the diaspora study team? So sometimes in one team we would have, for instance, more policymakers or academics, and we need to find that balance to make it very comprehensive and a very effective way of collecting data, but also implementing in the next steps. What are you going to do after with this data? So that's also something important to think about in the whole research process. Finally, we go to the last part of the step-by-step guide, which considers the analysis and the communication strategies. Once you have the data, how do you need to communicate and to whom? So these are the questions that we address. What are the right methods of analysis and the right methods to communicate results? So we consider different types of stakeholders, of course, because we think that the message would be dependent on basically the person that you're trying to communicate the message to. So if you're trying to communicate with policymakers, then you might be using certain channels of communication and so on and so forth. So all of this is explained step by step in this section of the Diaspora Mapping Toolkit. So just to give you a quick example of how it looks like, basically we have checklists, examples, case studies, definitions, almost to-do lists of things that you have to consider and reflect upon before conducting any type of diaspora research. So it also provides technical guidance, and it's, as I was saying before, it's a very simple tool to use and to implement in your context. The second element that I would like to introduce is the methodologies and methods. So as I was mentioning before, there are different ways of conducting diaspora research. And of course, we know that all methods have their own limitations. So in this diaspora mapping toolkit, we are very open and critical about those, and we present them in a very systematic way and also in a very practical way. And I think that's something to highlight. I really like how the mapping toolkit presents information in a very practical way. Do's and don'ts, considerations, questions. People have, I would say, we have presented this toolkit in different fora, and I think people really like this actionable part of research, which it's quite innovative in that sense, to really merge the policy world with the academic world, without, of course, letting aside the ethical considerations that we know are crucial when we are conducting this type of studies. So there is also a section on reflexivity, positionality, and the considerations that we have to consider, well, basically to take into account as a researcher. We have to be very conscious that when we go to the field, we as researchers also have an impact on the participants. So how to address those considerations, how to be critical and analytical about those. And we provide the guidance to do so in this toolkit. So just before continuing, in all the diaspora mapping toolkit and in all the methodologies section in particular, we go through the whole process, the whole research process. So first, the collection and sampling, then the analysis, and finally, the reporting and visualization stages. So we give examples, best practices in these three areas through the whole kit. So in the module, just focusing on quantitative methodologies, we provide guidance on how to conduct and elaborate surveys, how to structure them. We provide examples, good practices, and we give specific advice on how to sample the population that you will be working with. Are you focusing on specific cities or countries? What are the implications of doing this? How is your data going to be biased, basically, while taking these decisions? So we also provide suggestions for the analysis, dissemination, and visualization on the quantitative results. Here are two components that I want to share with you. One is an informed consent box. So as I was mentioning before, the ethical considerations are very important when you collect data. And of course, we also highlight that in the toolkit. So we also included a specific methodologies on how to do so, and there are also an annex of an example of a consent form, for instance. And also one of other sections that I really like is this table 8 that presents different types of figures to report survey data. So basically there is an analysis and we present the different types of charts that exist and how they are appropriate, or maybe you can use another type of chart to basically present your results. Then another section on the methodologies is the qualitative methodologies section or module, of course. So in this one, we focus on semi-structured interviews, on focus group discussions, and we make clear considerations related to sampling and guidance on research ethics. We also provide information on and best practices on how to present and analyze your results, how to disseminate them, and how to communicate them in different for different basically recipients, from diaspora members to policy makers or academics, for instance. So there are two key components that I wanted to show you in this section. One would be the example of the leading questions and better solutions. So when we're conducting diaspora mapping, we might come from, for instance, from another country, and we're entering a complete new world. And we, as a researcher, we have to be curious, respectful, and also mindful of all of the cultural sensitivities. So that's why we really unpack all of these sensitivities in this diaspora mapping toolkit, because we're working with different cultures and in different settings, in different contexts, and we have to be very reflective of all of these environments. So we provide a clear guidance on what would be relevant to say, or how to frame certain types of questions, because we wouldn't like to bias our research, or maybe to overcome certain sensitivities of the context. So another figure that I wanted to share with you today is the role of gatekeepers. So as you know, in diaspora research, gatekeepers are essential because they are those leaders that connect multiple networks in the diasporas. So it is important to know them, but it's also very important to be aware of the limitations that we might have. So in order to diversify the entry points of the diaspora mapping, we also present this as opportunities, challenges, and factor of success. So those are important considerations for any successful diaspora mapping. Then the next module would be about the secondary data, which is the third module on the methodologies, which basically presents a very deep analysis on the use of pre-existing data. We analyze the relevance of course, literature review, administrative and survey data, big data and onomastics, and of course, organizational and business registry records. So all of this information that it's already available, it's also very important to integrate in the diaspora mapping. So that's why it's important to have a closer look at this section, because there are different ways and agencies that have been using these tools. We also provide an analysis of the advantages and disadvantages of all of these methods. Again, it's in a very simplified way, and we made this type of resources available like this because we are intending to have this common methodology that hopefully will be used by policymakers, and also it could be used by academics. Finally, the third element before going into discussion and knowing more about your own research or questions is the indicators and questions for diaspora mappings. So in the diaspora mapping toolkit, you will find already list of indicators and corresponding survey interviews questions, depending on what you're planning to do, if you're planning to do a qualitative study or a quantitative study. But we have already prepared a lot of questions and indicators for you to deploy. So this, it's ready for use. And what I wanted to also highlight is the comprehensive way that we have, the comprehensive approach that we have taken to design these questions, which is basically understanding that diasporas have the potential in different sectors, and they have the capitals from the economic to human, cultural, and social spheres, and they contribute at all these levels in society. So that's the approach that we had in mind when developing these indicators. And just to give you an example, basically we have what we call the core module, which is really the base of all the research and the questions. So this core module, you have to think it almost like a game. You have the core module and then some extensions that you can put together if you want to know more about specific thematics like the economic, human, cultural, or social. But basically the core module already, it's a great start to collect a lot of data, because we included demographic and socioeconomic characteristics, migration experiences, identification and belonging, financial contributions and skills transfer, and also civic involvement and citizenship. So all of this already has a quite comprehensive way of approaching diasporas and getting the information from these incredible populations to implement new projects or for your research. Then the other modules, which are the specific modules, they go in depth and they present specific questions on economic, human capital, cultural capital, and social capital. So this is how the information is presented. In each of the indicators, I just wanted to highlight that it comes with a description and then a skip logic, and also guidance in case that's needed. So all of this, it's quite easy to follow, because we try to make it easy and user-friendly. That's it from my side. I try to be brief because I would really like to open for discussion. I don't know if anyone has questions.
Sorry, I'm just going to open the, I think if anyone would like to speak, they might be able to do that now. If not, you can just send me a message in the chat and then
I don't see any questions, but no worries. I have also questions to trigger discussion. Oop. Wait. Okay. So I wanted to ask you, basically, if you think these elements can, well, how do these elements that I've just presented consolidate existing practice? And also, second question that I would like to ask you is, from the perspective of your organization or your sector, how would you evaluate the toolkit and its potential use? I think it's important to start making the connections and getting the feedback from different actors to come with more comprehensive, rigorous solutions on how to collect data. So those are two questions that I wanted to share with you, but please let me know. Yes, I see Deria wants to ask something, please.
yes, I think
yes. So thank you for the presentation, Larissa. I think it's very useful for the especially researchers who are working on diasporas. And we have already finished two focus groups and one survey related to the European scientific diasporas in the US. So my question is that we are still in the analyzing part. We gather the data, but so this toolkit is going to be very important, but I'm not a data analyst. We have one researcher, but I think the most important thing is when you have the raw data, how you are going to analyze. And because of this, toolkit is very important, right? So my question is, how can we benefit from this toolkit? Because even everything is written, I saw the difficulty of, even finding the questions, organizing them, and being very sensitive to, because diaspora is something very sensitive also, the questions. And in the analyzing data part, how can we benefit from this toolkit? Plus, I mean, anyone from the other organizations or universities that can help us. I mean, in terms of, because I know that there's some organizations working on it. So do we need any also kind of channels that we can collaborate in the process of analyzing this data with the help of this toolkit, of course?
Thank you so much for that. And yes, no, definitely. I think what is very important is also to consider that this toolkit has been developed thinking from the academic world, but also tested in the policy world, so and in the field. So I think that's why we really try to make the questions as simple as possible, but also as relevant as possible for the different actors. And hopefully in the toolkit you will find that path. But in order to concretely analyze the data, and then we have the section on the team, for instance. Teams have been, well, they have to be formed by different types of experts. So you can have someone that is very good at methodology, someone that is good at analyzing, and someone that is good at, for instance, writing the results or analyzing the results. So I think having all of those members in your team would be very relevant, because then they can provide also their feedback, and they can have the lead on certain areas to make really the most out of data. So I know there are different ways also of analyzing the data. If you're collecting surveys, you can use different tools. And once again, all of them will have the limitation, but that's why we try to come with a very clear table explaining why you should use certain tools instead of others. In terms of visualization, also we came up with different examples that you can find and links directly in the toolkit. So I think yes, those would be my first reactions. I also see Martin is there. Martin, do you want to join the conversation, since we are quite a few in the room?
Hiya, buddy. How are you?
Hey.
Hi, Martin.
Hi there. How are things? Apologies, I dialed in late. I was tied up in another event, so apologies if it was covered. But I think, Larissa, we've talked about this quite a bit, and maybe just your reflections on developing the toolkit. And quite often, driving scale of response from diaspora communities can be quite difficult, for a myriad of issues, whether that's, a lack of confidence in where the data may end up, how it's going to be used, and most importantly, who's going to use it in many situations. So I'm just wondering, I suppose, over the last particularly over the last 3 to 4 years, we've seen an acceleration of different institutions begin to kind of enter into this area. So look, my own background is academic. If you told me 5-10 years ago that Harvard University would be running diaspora mapping projects, I would have said you're crazy. but we're seeing it now. So I'm just wondering, do you get a sense of, is there different tools that are suited to different actors, but how do we drive that response in terms of scale of response? And is there any way in which we can kind of screen who gets engaged as well? Because quite often how we define diasporas can be loose, and the data can get a little bit, how useful is it in the end, and all that kind of stuff. So thanks for that.
No, absolutely. And thank you for highlighting that. And I think it really connects to what Daria was saying before, which is the relevance of knowing the context. I think when we are approaching any diaspora, it's important to know, besides the gatekeepers, the political context, because not all of the diasporas or diaspora members would like to have the registration, right? Just to give you an example, last week I met a Mexican here in Geneva. I'm from Mexico, and he told me I wouldn't like to share my own data with the government. So of course that brings the question of trust that we always discuss in diaspora engagement. So who are we giving our data to? And I think that goes even beyond diaspora mapping. It goes really to digital literacy and what we are as users of the, basically of, I would go as far as the internet, giving to the different actors that are there. When we accept the cookies in our computer, what are we accepting to? So I think there is definitely a different way of approaching this question, but I think it also comes even to the individual and the user, and even of different regulations that exist. For instance, the European Union is much more advanced in that type of regulation of how different actors collect data in a much more systematic way than other regions that we can see in the US, for instance, that they have more liberty. So that is changing and evolving, and I think it's a great moment to ask that question, because we really need to emphasize that consciousness on the collection and use of data, and what we're opening the door to, basically. So I completely agree with you, Martin, on that there are more actors collecting data and I would say in a better way than some institutions can, just through the news and social media, etc.
Perfect, thanks. I see Fanny has her hand up, so I'll pause at this stage.
Thank you. Yeah, if I can jump in here. Hi everyone. On the question of trust, I think that this is a question that we have discussed also quite a bit. Whether it is better to have a neutral actor like researchers that are involved in this kind of exercises, or if we can really leave the exercises to the country of origin, for example, and then like face maybe this kind of issues of like some parts of the diaspora that wouldn't be that willing to give their data. So yeah, maybe what is your take on that? Do you think that there is like a perfect approach, that it is always better to have a neutral actor or not? And then just about the target audience of the toolkit, I think it's a great tool, but I feel it is targeted mainly at researchers, if I'm not mistaken. Or are you also targeting governments? And in this case, how do you deal also with maybe differences in capacity to conduct such exercises?
Yes, thank you, Fanny, for those excellent comments too. So in terms of the best framework or best strategy to collect data, even if researchers are the most critical and I would say prepared people to conduct this type of research, I think it is hard to say they will be the best to do it, because I really think in multi-stakeholder in a multi-stakeholder approach. And I say this because maybe there are some cases where researchers, and we have seen, also come and are members from that diaspora. So I think to what extent they would be also be willing to share that information with the government, it's also not a clear path. And I think it's from my experience, and also see again, it's context by context, so it's hard to give just a quick answer, but I would say that it's always very enriching also to try to really implement this type of service from a multi-stakeholder approach. So that would be my response for the first question. And then for the second one, in terms of the audience for this toolkit, it's researchers, but also implementers. So whenever governments try to also have access to this data of their diasporas, some of them, of course, they know what they would like to ask, but others, they are not really aware of all the potential and the capacities and the capital that diasporas have. So I think it's also very important to advocate for them to really engage with their diasporas in all the different work that they can do, taking into consideration the different capitals, as I was explaining. So we're actually developing a training for the governments on this toolkit just now, to have it online and open for everyone to use it. But I think we are in this process of basically sharing the knowledge and the potential that diasporas have in the different levels of society, and really raise that awareness. So it all starts with curiosity, and I will give you an example. We were in a talk in El Salvador, and then the country basically wanted to collect data, and they would approach someone in the private sector that maybe they don't have that deep knowledge. So we presented the Diaspora Mapping Toolkit, and then they were attracted to learn more about it, and then synergies started to be created. So maybe the government is definitely not a researcher and they don't have that expertise, but the fact that they are exposed to these different tools developed by, again, academics and policymakers and people in the field, then they are aware of the richness and the potential that diasporas bring to their societies, and then they start making the linkages. So I think it's also very important to keep sharing these messages with the different actors that are involved. And at the end of the day, I think diaspora is one of the topics that really touches upon all the sectors. So it's just a matter of tailoring the message, I think. Martin, yes.
Hi, I fell into the trap of speaking when muted. No, I just want to follow up on something. I think that's cutting across Fanny's question. I think it's something that you mentioned in responding to the previous question I put forward. When I was reading the toolkit, look, I think it's an incredibly in-depth resource, you know, for a variety of actors. But it is the culture of where we're going to generate and access our data on diasporas changing. You know, I think, for example, you have Meta now, previously Facebook, with a policy position for Africa, the Middle East, and Turkey. We've seen an acceleration, for example. I know this is a big passion of yours as well, Larissa. I think it's fair to say around, you know, the role of digital in all this. We're seeing the creation of incredible apps and kind of digital-based solutions around, sometimes around specific interest areas for diaspora, but the data being generated is phenomenal. I'll give an example. Look, I'm involved on the board of a incredible charity in Ireland that provides a free online genealogical service. I very quickly realized, because that word free and genealogy, you know, the amount of data we were generating is quite possibly in comparison with what the Irish government have. And I'm just wondering, in the sense of, you know, when you're thinking about training with government or the different particular end users of the toolkit, how do we kind of blend in those different actors as well? Because I think you kind of hinted at maybe, you know, with GDPR and different issues, where people are playing in terms of sharing their data is fundamentally different now. I have two young nieces to spend most of their time with the head down, you know, so when you're talking about getting their data in the next 5 to 10 years, it will have to be through digital solutions, I'd imagine. So I'm just wondering, you know, do you see something there in terms of how the toolkit could be used, or the people that we need around that table moving forward to kind of to really get the granular data that we want to get? I don't know if that's a relevant question or not.
Yeah, thank you, Martin. I think it should spark a lot of conversation and reactions from everyone, because the future and the present is digital, and it will keep growing. So I think there is definitely an importance of considering digital regulations to a certain extent, like who, as I was saying before, who has access to our data. And I think something that is important, of course, the toolkit is an institutional toolkit, so we consider IOM privacy and data regulations also. But just bringing this beyond the IOM toolkit, I think in terms of who is collecting the data, and for diaspora, you were mentioning Meta, and of course, they also are having their units on diaspora and how they are collecting it. And it's very interesting, because they would use, for instance, I'm sure you all are familiar with Facebook, and how even they define diaspora. It's interesting because they don't have a specific label on diaspora, but it would be people living abroad, or people whose interest is for instance, the expats or something like that, they have different labels. So it's also very interesting to see the different type of definitions that they have inside of their own platforms and the structures. But I would definitely see it's not only a challenge, but it's a lot of opportunity to really be aware of the importance of giving our information. I think that's something that everyone should be more aware of, in not only in research, but just in our daily use of the of internet and digital tools.
And just quickly on that, and I'll be quiet after this, Larissa, and let other people speak. You know, one thing I don't know whether you've thought about this in terms of, and I think government have a role to play here. And I'm trying to put back on that institutional application of the toolkit, if you will. You know, let me be frank. If you're within an organization and you have data, you know, it's a competitive edge. No, it is, you know, so getting people to share that data is not an easy thing to do, you know, in a sense. And look, we see, for example, just even within diaspora organizations, you know, speaking openly and honestly, some are maybe better than others, and they may have deeper data than others would have. So I'm just wondering, do you have any reflections on how maybe, because I'd imagine this is being used in the wider context of diaspora and development, right? So we're trying to figure out that development piece. So I'm just wondering, how do you have any reflections, and it may be an unfair question, on how maybe government or the development ask needs to be shaped, that people get a little bit more comfortable with sharing the data across organizations, not necessarily as individuals using these platforms, but how do organizations get a little bit more comfortable sharing data, because you might be giving up a little bit of power if you do.
Yes, no, I agree. And there are frameworks at the UN level, at the government level, so legal frameworks that basically shape this type of sharing data. But I don't think there is a common understanding, and even in the future, right? Because if you think about diaspora mappings, they all have like sort of life. So every 5 years, for instance, it would be interesting to renew them. So with access to big data, and actually there is a module on that on the Diaspora Mapping Toolkit, that we try to start understanding and really set the future steps for collecting data in a much more systematic way, but also where the user is aware of what they are giving, which is the information. And I agree with you on the competitive advantage. Interesting, because we are always talking about diasporas, not engagement being the non-competitive field, but then when we start bringing data in, then it becomes a little bit competitive, as you were mentioning. Definitely.
Thanks, Larissa.
Thanks, Martin. Great. Oh. Sorry, I'm still sharing my screen. I realize. Great. So I don't know if anyone has more questions. Thank you for the comment there. There, yeah. And maybe since I know I have the opportunity to be in a nice group and almost of friends, I was thinking that maybe for next steps, how we can also envision the applicability in different sectors now that diasporas are also working through different specific sectors, such as health, as we have seen even in this conference, or addressing specific challenges in education. So Martin, I don't know if you also want to comment on that.
Thanks, Larissa. Yeah, I think it's about finding the right people. Pardon the pun, in terms of the data. Look, I think you know from our work, Larissa, sometimes we get in trouble when we say this publicly, but you know, quite often, particularly when you're thinking about a sectoral approach, sometimes it can be the right 20 people in your diaspora that can push you forward. So that was another interesting reflection I had on reading the toolkit, in the sense of how do we get it into the hands of the people, you know, that are kind of on the front line of this. So I think, you know, for me, I think if you take that sectoral approach, as you mentioned, I think we have some real solid traditional sectors where diasporas play. You mentioned, you know, health, education, science, as we're kind of convening at this conference. So I think if you can keep building the profile of it there and getting out to the key distribution networks within those, but I think it comes back to, you know, the clarity on the purpose, I think, of why the mapping is happening, you know, and you may have covered that at the beginning. I think quite often in diaspora engagement, we joke about the fireworks syndrome, you know, that things go off in a blaze of glory and quickly disappear, you know. So I think really understanding the why and the why of the engagement, and sometimes, you know, I think that's where Fanny's question and Darius' intervention was critical too, in trying to figure out what I was hearing there as well. What's the entry point? You know, because if you're looking at it from a government using it as a diaspora mapping profile, you want to have that kind of all-inclusive approach to figuring out what all layers of your diaspora want to do. But if you're targeting, you know, a very specific intervention, you know, it could be that you're just talking about a very small segment of your diaspora. And quite frankly, you know, we have to be, and again, we get in trouble when we say that sometimes we have to be a little bit clinical, you know, and the simple reality is that, yeah, this is the reality of life, that sometimes certain people can do more for you than other people can in terms of development, and different organizations can do more. So I think when you begin to think about those really targeted interventions, I think that's where you can actually accelerate the impact of the toolkit, because you have it in the sense of really being understanding, right, well, this is the purpose, this is why. And we talk about the 4 steps of diaspora engagement: research, cultivation, solicitation, and stewardship. And the research piece is that mapping. And coming back to the competitiveness that I talked about previously, that look, I've learned that on the fundraising front, because if you have diaspora organizations out there that are looking to raise funds for whatever purpose, if they have their data, you know, and they have success from that, they don't want to share it with the organization down the road that's, you know, going to ask the same community for something else, because it'll take away. So that's where I would say, in terms of finding the right people, but understanding the clarity of the why, you know, in the sense of, well, why are we actually designing this diaspora engagement, and understanding how we're going to use these tools to get us to what we need to know about that segment of the community. I don't know if that helps or not, but I'll pause there because I see. Yes.
I see Fanny wants also to react. Thank you, Martin.
Yes, thank you. Just very quickly, I think that it can be actually potentially interesting to gather people around topics that are more specific, because also just a question of interest. People might be more willing to engage in a topic that is also like advancing their own interest, or their own even career or whatever, rather than looking at the broad picture and saying, okay, I have to engage with with my country of origin, but without really knowing where this engagement is going. So I think that engaging around specific thematics or topics is a good entry point, maybe to boost some areas of engagement, and maybe also to get some people into the discussion that wouldn't be part of it if we only look at diaspora engagement in a general manner.
Just to echo on that, Larissa, before you come in, I don't know if people are familiar with there was an Australian politician many decades ago. He had a great line. He said, "In the great race of life, always back self-interest, because at least you know it's trying." Right? And I think that speaks to what Fanny's talking about. And even if you look at this conference, you know, to have this conference sold out is an incredible achievement, but it's under that lens of science. So I think quite often we can be a little bit warm and fuzzy about diasporas, you know, that they're out there, they're wanting to engage. And, you know, but I can't tell you the amount of times I've heard from people, you know, I'm an architect in the diaspora. I don't want to talk to a dentist back home. I want to talk to the architect. You know, so that kind of peer-to-peer exchange, and you know, let's not be afraid of nurturing a little bit of self-interest. That's where, you know, things can get moving. So I'll pause on that, Larissa, because it's your session.
No, absolutely, and thank you. It makes it very conversational, and I'm really learning also from your approaches. And I really think it's a moment to focus on the individual, the talent, the interest that they have, because at the end of the day, another problem that we have in diaspora engagement is sustainability. So if you also manage to get the real passion behind the individual, it is more likely that they will engage in the longer run with and keep supporting the country of origin or their communities in different countries. So I absolutely agree with that. I saw Naresh had a question, so please feel free to jump in.
Thank you, Larissa. And sorry, I could not join on time, so I was busy in some other session. So
yeah, I can use that medicine tonight.
Yeah, thank you for sharing your thoughts. So actually, particularly I am a field of migration and diaspora. So my nature of inquiry is that because there is a lots of disciplinary actually work already has been done to actually to coverage the the various issues and challenges pertaining to migration and diaspora. So now diaspora now become an independent or interdisciplinary approach totally actually. And so various organizations like IOM and various independent centers are already working in this area. So, so the actually the nature of a theoretical gap or research actually we look in case of diaspora, particularly in the diaspora in case of India, like we are working in last almost 12 years in the area of this field, and so many students already done their PhD or MPhil. So actually we are facing the problem in case of data, particularly in the field of diaspora or particularly the international migration. We have a very limited statistics. So somehow actually IOM is contributing and with the help of the actually country partners providing certain statistics, but still we have a lots of actually gaps in terms of characteristics, in terms of actually theoretical implication of the various model, whether it is a Western model or whether it is actually belonging to the Southern hemisphere model. So we need to actually somehow to reduce this gap through the actually to make a research in a such a point of view that to coverage this limitation in terms of data or in terms of whether it is related to the host country or origin country. So we have to think much more of that direction. Otherwise, there is a lots of theoretical work already have been done, but somehow it's failed in terms of covering the various issues and challenges pertaining to the diaspora communities. Until it will not solve that, our research will not success. So this is my submission. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Naresh, for pointing out definitely gaps that we all are trying to fill from the different points, right? Which is the coming with comprehensive and comparable statistics. I think we are definitely working on that, and different institutions are. But as we were discussing before, I think big data it's the area where we can also take advantage and the opportunity of it to also fill those statistical gaps. So thank you for that intervention. I see Daria has also her hand up.
Yes, Larissa. So, I mean, normally I have so many questions just because before this session, I was a bit late because I was presenting the results of 2 focus groups and 1 survey that we conducted last year. So I saw that how it was really difficult to find the questions and to reach people and to ask the ethics and connect with the EU and for the data collection regulations and other things. And plus, when we organize the focus groups, it was another not difficulty but many steps that we have to go through. So without having an exercise, I mean, these experiences, I think it's difficult to understand how it is really difficult to start a process like this, collecting data. So I'm a social scientist, but I haven't done a survey or focus group before. So when I asked people, they said, oh, you can do it. You can just analyze the questions like with coding. But when I started, as you came with the idea that team is important. So I said that I thought that perhaps it is the most important thing that start this process with a good team, with good research questions and with your hypothesis. It doesn't have to be academic work. And the point that I came now is that I really need to reach more stakeholders, as you told. So how we are going to do that? This is something saying is easy, but for example, in our group, we wanted to reach out to European scientific diaspora. So we specialized. So it make it a bit easier, but at the same time difficult because we had less data when we just filtered. So this is the thing. So I just want to share that this toolkit is very useful. And I wish I had it before I started this process. So my question is, are you going to have some kind of trainings? You said perhaps for the government officials, but how about the other diaspora leaders? Because you know what? They want to also collect data. And I am the part of Euraccess North America, Euraccess big team. It's a big project. And my mission, I mean, I just put it as a kind of my mission, is that how we can make a kind of European, start with the platform, European platform or hub that we can connect European scientific diasporas, because if it is going to be open, we cannot do that. So the first part is collecting data, and this is just a post, it's going to be a policy report for the EU. So do you have different kinds of initiatives that we can also involve and see how the others have some experience for that?
Sure. No, thank you for the question. And the training that we are developing is going to be available for everyone. So it's going to be in IOM eCampus. And once it's ready, we will make sure we distribute it across our networks. So everyone will have access to it. And we will basically describe step by step how to use the Diaspora Mapping Toolkit. So that's going to be an open source for everyone. Not only governments. Oh, you're muted.
Okay, so what is the time? I mean,
The timeline?
Yeah.
Before the end of this year, we would be looking at having it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Martin, I see your hand.
Yeah, this is a question actually. It percolated in my head. Is it Naresh? I think he's dropped off, but I think he said something really important. And I say this as somebody who calls himself a boring academic. You know, I think we're facing a big challenge more generally in the area around diaspora study. Yep, please, Dana, jump in.
Sorry, I don't want to interrupt. We have to end the meeting soon because we have another session. But also welcome, Professor Farouk. I think you are our next speaker, but unfortunately you are in the wrong meeting.
Oops.
I think you have to join your session link.
Well, that's what I did. That's what I did.
I think
that's what I did.
If you go on the lobby and then choose your session.
Can we just take the last comment from Martin and then we can maybe
of course
close it?
No, it was a follow-up, I think, to Naresh in a sense of, you know, the current standing of diaspora studies, because I think the research demands on diaspora studies now are evolving in a sense of, you know, application in the market as well. So I'm just wondering, it's kind of linked to Dario's question as well about the training in a sense of how can we get this into the hands of the academics as well? Because quite often we kind of work in our own little silos and way in the world, but I think the parameters of universities are changing, and the demands of the knowledge we produce is not just for creation, but for application. So I'm just wondering, have you thought about, you know, partnerships long-term as well with the academic sector to kind of get this out?
Absolutely. Yes, we had the chance to present the toolkit at IMISCO. So we're really trying to approach also academics, because I think in any case, many academics also are consultants for governments or for organizations. So it's important that they have this data.
You're viewing the lobby of the conference, right?
Perfect. So maybe we can close the session, I would say, since it's already time. But thank you so much for all your comments and engagement. And I hope to see you soon. I'm sure I will see you soon. We are all connected anyways. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you so much, Dr. Larissa, and everyone for coming as well, and for the discussion. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure having you. Thank you.